America, behold the Strait of Hormuz. This is why your car is able to start up when you turn the key. This little tiny channel there is how oil from the Persian Gulf gets out to the ocean, whereby it gets transited all over the world and sold on the international market. A third of all the oil transited by sea goes through that tiny little spot. Now, on the south side of the Strait of Hormuz is the nation of Oman. Tiny country, popular clue in New York Times crosswords, particularly early in the week. On the other side of the Strait of Hormuz is Iran. Oh, Iran. Today, Iran said they would completely halt the flow of all oil through the Strait of Hormuz. According to state media, Iran's first vice president said today that, quote, if the West imposes sanctions on Iran's oil exports, then even one drop of oil cannot flow from the Strait of Hormuz. If that's the case, that means not just oil from Iran, it's the oil from Saudi Arabia, the oil from Kuwait, the oil from Iraq, the oil from the UAE. Most of the liquefied natural gas in the world gets exported out of Qatar. That, too, will not be able to get through. Say goodbye. The reason Iran is freaking out and threatening to do this very dramatic thing is because of European and American threats against Iran. The European Union is considering an all-out embargo, a ban on anybody buying oil from Iran. They want to do that for the 27 nations of the European Union, and they're working to convince their allies all around the world to do the same. If that happens, it would be like flicking the light switch off on Iran's economy. Complete and fast economic disaster. And so Iran is doing a 10-day war games exercise right in the Strait of Hormuz. They're saying they are willing to shut down the Strait of Hormuz completely, shut down a third of the world's oil that is transported by sea. Goodbye, Persian Gulf. Now, if there are threats going back and forth between Iran and the West, it must be a day that ends in Y. Saber rattling and threats between Iran and the West are nothing new. What is new, though, is how big and severe the sanctions threat is against Iran to try to get it to stop what most of the rest of the world believes is its nuclear weapons program. The UN Security Council has already slapped Iran with 4 rounds of sanctions. Before Congress went on Christmas vacation, the House of Representatives passed something called the Iran Threat Reduction Act of 2011. They passed it by a vote of 410 to 11. When's the last time something passed the House by a winning margin of 399 votes? That House bill involves sanctions on Iran's central bank. Any country buying oil from Iran is doing business with Iran's central bank. Congressman Howard Berman explained this to The Hill. He said, quote, this measure would cut Iran entirely off from the world's banking system. It would also mean that American officials could not hold talks with corresponding officials in Iran. If you think about that for a second, that means, as Dennis Kucinich explained when he voted against this bill with this huge 400-vote margin, as Dennis Kucinich explained when he voted against it, this means that if you had hoped that diplomacy would be a way to end this situation peacefully, it is a pretty big deal that the House essentially just voted to ban diplomacy as a means of trying to resolve differences between our country and Iran. Already the turmoil has caused Iran's own currency, which is called the rial, to lose about a third of its value in the last few months. That's inspired average Iranians to rush out to buy gold and to buy dollars. If the money you normally have is losing value rapidly, you want to preserve your wealth in something that is not losing value. So ordinary Iranians have been lining up at banks, sleeping in line even, in order to buy any currency other than their own, anything but the rial. Here at home, another version of sanctions on Iran's central bank made their way into the defense bill that President Obama signed into law last week. The administration was against it. It was against that amendment, but Congress passed it, and President Obama did sign it into law anyway. So now Iran is showing off its military might in the Straits of Hormuz. That is a threat both to Europe and to us and to anybody who ever wants to buy oil. And if you've still got anyone on your list for whom you have not yet bought a Christmas present, have you considered a barrel of oil? It might be good for paying off somebody's college education someday, or buying them a small island somewhere. Joining us now is Josh Rogan, staff writer for Foreign Policy Magazine and author of the Cable blog. Josh, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.
So there are threats flying back and forth between the U.S. and Iran, between the Europeans and Iran. That in and of itself is not new. Both sides regularly threatening each other. But is there something qualitatively different about what's going on right now between Iran and the West? Are the stakes actually higher somehow?
Yes, and you hit it perfectly, actually. The Obama administration has been trying to avoid ramping up the confrontational tone with Iran, especially in an election year. The last thing they want to do is provoke a crisis. And unfortunately, they've been forced into signing this new sanctions bill. It's the Kirk-Menendez bill, which puts crippling sanctions on the Central Bank of Iran. And not only that, it forces the U.S. to sanction third countries who do business. We're talking about any country around the world, and that's every country, including allies like Japan and South Korea. So the administration's in a tough spot here. They have to enforce the sanctions. They have some leeway, but now is the battle over these third countries, and that's what Iran is doing here. They're sending a message to all these countries around the world. If you follow these U.S. sanctions, we're going to punish you, and if you don't follow these U.S. sanctions, the U.S. is going to punish you. And it puts all of these countries into a horrible situation, a lose-lose scenario, and that's exactly what the administration was trying to avoid.
Is this a scenario in which the Europeans and the Americans could end up split from China and Russia, where China and Russia say, you know what, we're big enough and we don't need you and we're willing to continue to do business with Iran. The rest of you guys are opting out. We'll happily make the difference up?
I think that split is already there. I think that's pretty evident. Let's remember there are lots of sanctions against Iran, as you mentioned. China and Russia are largely believed to be ignoring those sanctions. That gives Iran some leeway, but not enough leeway. And the Europeans are really the key ones here. I mean, if they go through with that oil embargo, that will have a huge effect. And the Obama administration will then be, quote unquote, leading from behind. But that is the operative point in the debate right now. It's not only about China and Russia, too. Countries like Japan and South Korea are hugely dependent on Iranian oil, and they're huge American allies. The Japanese foreign minister came to town and told Secretary Clinton, we can't do this. We really don't want to cut off our oil imports from Iran. And the Secretary of State said to him, well, listen, we'll work it out somehow. But how they work it out is not clear. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise, brinksmanship goes on, and we're all headed towards some sort of either diplomatic and hopefully not a military confrontation.
In terms of the European decision, which you're identifying as sort of the key turning point here, when do you expect that to be made, and what do you think that's going to be? Is there any doubt that Europe's going to go through with it?
Yeah, we don't know what their decision is going to be. The bottom line here is that the precedent for this is Europe's oil embargo on Syria, which is an Iranian client state, which is going through horrendous violence right now, and that is having a really deep effect on the Syrian government's ability to do business. But if Syria is a double-A team, Iran's the major leagues here. They have a much bigger economy. They control much more of the world oil market, and European countries would suffer if their governments go through with this, and that's a very serious political consideration. Back here in Washington, the American economy will suffer if we put crippling sanctions on Iran that force world oil markets into disarray, that raise gas prices. And the Obama administration doesn't trust that the average voter is going to draw the distinction between the benefits of delaying Iran's nuclear program and the higher prices at the gas tank. It's really a tough one to explain, and it's really a discussion they don't want to have heading into their presidential election. It's just not a good idea for them.
Josh Rogan, staff writer for Foreign Policy Magazine, author of the cable blog at foreignpolicy.com. Josh, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tensions over Iran's nuclear program have triggered a war of words over one of the world's most important waterways. 1/6 of the world's oil is shipped from the Persian Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz, and Iran is threatening to close the strait if the U.S. imposes tough new sanctions on Iran. That could send oil prices sky high, and the U.S. is warning against such a move. But today, Iran said the U.S. had no business telling Iran what to do.
There is a new threat tonight from Iran to block a critical supply route for oil, the Strait of Hormuz, linking the Persian Gulf to the world's sea lanes. And tonight, the U.S. Navy is warning Iran, don't try it. More on all this now from our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, in our Washington bureau. Andrea.
Good evening, Lester. Iran has made these threats before, but the Pentagon issued that stern rebuttal because some U.S. officials worry this time it could be more than just bluster. Iran has been staging military exercises as they do near the strait, possibly, though, this time in response to a recent Senate amendment imposing the toughest sanctions ever on Iran's banking system and its oil trade. The Obama administration opposed that Senate vote, wanting to phase in more targeted sanctions, because the Strait of Hormuz, as you pointed out, is the key passageway for 1/6 of the world's oil. A crisis there could quickly add $25 a barrel, at least, to oil prices, hitting the world's economy and, of course, stalling the American recovery right here, just as it's recovering. But another big concern is also that these new sanctions will hurt a key U.S. ally, Japan, which relies heavily on Iranian oil. The Senate voted unanimously, though, 100 votes in favor. They almost never do that. Now the president is really boxed in. If he tries to get around the sanctions, he'll be accused of being soft on Iran. If he doesn't, he risks higher oil prices and stalling the economic recovery here at home in an election year. Lester?
Andrea, while we have you here, there's been some news out of Syria. Arab League observers have arrived. They're going to try and witness the uprising, also the government crackdown firsthand. What are they finding?
Well, it's very troubling so far to U.S. officials because the Arab League monitors have been on the ground for 2 days, and so far they have not pushed back against restrictions that the regime has imposed on their inspections. And these are the first outside monitors that Syria has even permitted in, but they have blocked their access to key areas where atrocities are reported. The U.S. is withholding any formal criticism because they're still hoping that this mission can succeed. But in these 2 days, the monitors have not gotten in, and activists are reporting 6 more killings. And opposition leaders are now calling this Arab League effort a farce. Lester?
Andrea Mitchell, thanks.
Iran's threat to close a crucial oil passageway is building uncertainty, particularly within the oil market. CNBC's Jackie DeAngelis is following that story. Jackie, tell me.
Hey, good morning, guys. Yeah, a U.S. Fifth Fleet spokesman in Bahrain came out yesterday saying that the Fifth Fleet will not allow disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. This coming after 2 warnings from Iran this week. The most recent yesterday saying that the blocking of the strategic passageway would be easier than drinking a glass of water. Now, tensions have been running high since EU foreign ministers decided 3 weeks ago that they were going to tighten sanctions on Iran to force it to halt its nuclear expansion. Now, let's take a look at why the Strait of Hormuz is important. Take a look at the map behind me here. It's important because it's a major artery for transporting oil. In fact, nearly 1/5 of the world's oil flows through the passageway, including oil from Bahrain, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar. You can see it right there. All the oil is flowing through there to get out of the Middle East and, of course, from Iran. Now, it sees a daily oil flow of about 15.5 million barrels. Meantime, when evaluating Iran's threats, it's really important to consider the total amount of oil that's transported, which we just discussed, but also equally noteworthy is Iran's production and its role as an exporter as well. Iran is the 2nd largest OPEC oil producer and the world's 5th largest crude exporter. So creating a block in the strait will definitely hurt its own economy, and that's why analysts are wondering how it's going to proceed as we move forward. Now, a U.S. State Department deputy spokesman highlighted yesterday that it appears Iran's threats are just another diversion from the real issue, which is their noncompliance with their nuclear obligations. Obviously, a much bigger issue that is really the one that needs to be addressed.
U.S. tensions with Iran are flaring up this morning. Tehran has alarmed American officials and the world by declaring that it would close the main artery for oil exports from the Persian Gulf if the West imposes sanctions over its nuclear program. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell has the latest. Andrea, there are several questions, but first, what is Iran up to and what do you think the consequences could be for us?
Those are good questions, Tamara, and it could be serious. Iran has made threats to shut down the Strait of Hormuz before, but this time it could be more than bluster as Tehran stages military exercises near the strait. It's issuing angry threats in response to the toughest sanctions yet from both Europe and the United States against Iran's banking system and its oil trade. Today, China weighed in, a key ally of Iran's, urging calm. Any oil interruption, of course, in the Strait of Hormuz, the key passageway for 15 million barrels of oil a day, would shut down or severely delay 1/6 of the world's oil supply. And that would be catastrophic for the U.S. and the global economy. Oil prices would likely go up $25 a barrel, at least $1 more at the pump right away. And although the Obama administration has ratcheted up its pressure on Iran over the years, it argued against these latest sanctions just approved by the Senate unanimously, 100-0. The Obama administration said that would drive energy prices up for our allies and hurt the economy here at home. Now the president is really boxed in. If he tries to go around these sanctions to waive them, he'll be accused of being soft on Iran. And if he doesn't, he risks higher oil prices in an election year. And now, of course, he faces the potential, at least the potential, of a military showdown to keep that oil passageway open. Tamara?
All right, Andrea, thank you.